Welcome back to Beginning Band COVID Companion Distance Learning for Band. This is video 2 of a 4-part series. You already learned how to assemble and disassemble your instrument. Now we will learn how to maintain the mechanics of the instrument and disinfect it. Then we will learn how to make beautiful sounds on our mouthpiece. Lastly, we will perform our first notes. I'm going to teach you how to maintain and disinfect your instrument. First, just listen. Don't try to maintain and disinfect it just yet. That will be next. Swab your instrument after every time you play. Check for loose screws periodically. Check for loose springs periodically. These two things will be uncommon, but it's wise to keep an eye on them. Apply key oil as needed, but never more than 1 drop. Store your instrument in a dry, safe place. Don't put any food into your instrument. Don't allow moisture, grease, oil, dirt near your keypads because it will cause harm. If you do notice a couple of screws are loose on your instrument, be careful not to over tighten them. Make sure that you don't use dangerous chemicals without reading the instructions on the back first. Make sure not to store your reed attached to your instrument. And never store your swab inside of your instrument. It will accumulate mold. Blowing food particles through your instrument is one of the primary causes of instrument malfunction. If you must practice immediately following eating, make sure to brush your teeth before you play. If you're practicing somewhere without your toothbrush, at least rinse your mouth out with water first. We will be swabbing our alto saxophone with our swab cloth every time you play. Insert the weighted tip of the cleaning swab into the bell. Let it fall into the bottom of the saxophone. Turn the saxophone so that the weighted tip falls down the long end toward the neck hole. Then, pull the swab all the way through. Since I practice my instrument every day, I can keep my swab at home and swab it then to avoid keeping a dirty swab somewhere where it can't dry, like my case. Never try to pull a swab through the neck. The neck isn't big enough for that. And never try to pull your swab through your mouthpiece. It could break your mouthpiece. It is absolutely imperative that also you never try to sword fight with your swab. That's gross. If you notice any extra moisture after your swab, or if you notice any dust buildup on your pads, you can use cleaning paper. Insert the paper between each key and the instrument. Press down on the key gently with one hand and pull the paper out with your other hand. If you don't have any fancy cleaning paper, you can use a dollar bill to clean the pads instead. Avoid using Kleenex or paper towel though, because it will leave behind residual shreds. The first time that you grease your cork, you're going to have to use a lot of grease. The newer your alto saxophone is, the more frequently you will need to grease it. Having a properly greased cork will make your instrument assembly require less force, reducing the chances of injury to your instrument, especially the octave key. Sometimes the screws come loose on the silver bars. Even though it's uncommon, it's wise to keep an eye on them because if they fall out, your instrument will fall apart. I gotta caution you on this though, do not over tighten the screws. If you do, the keys on your alto saxophone will stop moving altogether. If your screw is not over tightened and your keys won't move smoothly, you might need to apply 1 drop of key oil. But be careful, 1 drop is enough. More than that can be harmful to your instrument. The case on the left is superior and it will last for a very long time. What's special about this case is it allows you to use your reeds on something called a rotation. The case on the right is acceptable, but It's only a temporary solution until you get the better case. Using reeds on this rotation will make your reeds last longer, save you money in the long run, keep your reeds cleaner, safer, and less warped, and it will also allow for a longer period of time for germs to die or deactivate. What do I mean by using the reeds on a rotation? Well, as you can see with the picture on the left, each reed slot is labeled with a day of the week. Yes, we do combine Saturday and Sunday together because we usually practice less on those days. When it's time for a performance, always choose your favorite reed, but never perform on a brand new reed if you can avoid it. Why? Because it takes a few hours of playing to break in any reed to be ready to perform. So using reeds on a rotation means that you always have broken in reeds as a backup plan. Sometimes, especially if you're in a hurry, a spring will come loose. Check this first if you know that you're putting down the correct fingering for a note, but it still sounds incorrect. You probably want to ask your teacher for help with this the first few times, but as you advance as a saxophonist and have seen this done a few times, it's actually an easy fix. If you look at the picture on the left, that spring is out of place. It's just kind of hanging out in space. The picture on the right shows the spring corrected, tucked neatly behind the spring post. If you have been sick or somebody near you has been sick, it's likely that your alto saxophone has become infected too. The mouthpiece and reed are the most important to keep clean because they are the parts that touch your mouth. If you have a mouthpiece brush, you can clean the inside of your mouthpiece every time you play. But if you don't have a mouthpiece brush yet, a Q-tip works just fine as a replacement. Do not try to play right after you have put dangerous chemicals right on your mouthpiece. And also, make sure that you follow the directions on the back of the bottle as to how long you need to wait for it to be properly cleaned. You will want to clean any part of the instrument that you've touched with your hands as well. Be very careful with sanitary wipes because you don't want any of that moisture to get into your pads. Some chemicals, like rubbing alcohol, will do a good job of killing germs, but might weaken or remove the lacquer on your instrument or destroy other parts of your instrument too. So make sure to read the directions to know what you're doing. No matter what chemical you use, though, it's wise to wipe it down your instrument with a paper towel when you're done, and that way you won't have any residue. Absolutely do not try to give your alto saxophone a bath in the sink or a bathtub when you see other instruments doing that. With other instruments, it's okay for them to take a bath. Alto saxophones are not allowed to take a bath. It will destroy the keypads. You can bring the shine back to the outside of your saxophone with a polishing cloth. I do this the morning before every performance to wipe off any fingerprints or tarnish. Do not store your book or your sheet music in your alto saxophone case. It will bend the bars of your instrument. Sometimes there's an open slot for things like cork grease and a pencil. If you're really lucky, some alto saxophone cases have special zipper storage compartment on the outside of the case for music books, but otherwise, you're just going to need to use a backpack for those things. In response to COVID 19, you should definitely wash your hands before you play your instrument because you don't want whatever is on your hands to infect your instrument. Also, you want to wash your hands after you play your instrument because you don't want your instrument to get you sick if it is infected. The National Federation of State High School Associations published these findings on June 19th, 2020, as guidance for how long you should quarantine your instrument regarding the deactivation of COVID 19 on your instrument. The brass parts of your instrument need to be quarantined for up to 5 days. The wood part of your instrument needs to be quarantined for up to 4 days. Any plastic parts on your instrument need to be quarantined for up to 3 days. Any strings for also up to 3 days. And the cork on your instrument actually will deactivate COVID-19 after 2 days. That being said, if you suspect that you have been sick or somebody around you has been sick with COVID 19, you need to quarantine your instrument for a minimum of 5 days. This will ensure that the COVID 19 on your instrument has deactivated. Now that we have talked about maintaining your instrument, let's practice doing that together.
Now that you've seen how I maintain and sanitize my alto saxophone, I figured we could practice together at the same time so that you know how to do it too. So go ahead and get out your instrument case if you haven't already, and we'll start by greasing the cork. Get your cork grease. Looks a lot like chapstick. Please do not put it on your lips. It is not chapstick. What we can do now is apply it all the way around on the cork. Eventually, you'll have to do this less and less as the cork breaks in, but in the beginning, you're going to need a lot of cork grease. Let's take our mouthpiece out of the cap and test to make sure that it's greasy enough. If you find yourself shaking because you're pushing so hard just to get the mouthpiece on, it needs more cork grease and it needs to be broken in just a little bit more. If it went on kind of easily, great. You don't need to do it again for a little while. Earlier, we talked about how to use the swab. Just remember, bell first. Let it hit the bottom. Turn your saxophone so that it goes down the long end. Gravity will pull that weight down if you just feed the swab upward. Pull it all the way through. Now, as you're pulling it through, don't grip your saxophone so hard that you're going to bend the bars and the keys on your saxophone. Just pull it through gently. If you notice after swabbing that you have a couple of pads that are still pretty moist, or maybe you notice some of your pads are getting a little dusty looking, you can use something called the cleaning paper, which I have right here. If you haven't gone out and bought any cleaning paper yet, that's fine. You can use a dollar bill as a replacement, but I think we can all agree that cleaning paper is just a little bit more sanitary than a dollar bill. You don't know where that dollar bill has been. So if you notice that a key is a little bit more moist than the rest, all you have to do is take the cleaning paper, insert it between the key and the instrument, press down on that key. Now you want to apply enough pressure so that when you pull away there's a little bit of resistance, but you don't want to press so hard that you rip the paper because that doesn't make sense. So you just pull it out and yep, that cleans some of the residue off the inside. Just a reminder of how to use the neck swab. Most neck swabs are not intended to go in cork side first. They're just a little bit too big for that. So go ahead and feed it in the bottom, push it through as far as you can without forcing it. Doesn't need to go out the other end. We're just trying to get the residue out. All done. Talking about sanitizing our mouthpiece, because this is the piece that goes in our mouth, so we need to make sure that it is disinfected. Now, there are sprays just for mouthpieces, but in a pinch you can use things like other types of cleaners. But no matter what you end up using, make sure that you don't put it on your mouthpiece right before you play, because then you have dangerous chemicals in your mouth and that's no good at all. Also, make sure that you read the back of the bottle to make sure that you understand how long the disinfectant actually needs to be on the mouthpiece before it has any effect at all. So, a couple of sprays, both sides. Go ahead and get yourself a paper towel after the correct amount of time has passed, and you can just wipe that down and get the residue off. Earlier, we talked about screws getting a little bit loose. So I have a very small flathead screwdriver. For my saxophone, it is usually these top three keys that come loose first. So just a slight little bit of turn to get it back in there. You definitely don't want to over tighten these, otherwise the keys will stop moving. If you know that the screws are loose enough and yet still the keys are not moving the way they're supposed to, you might need just 1 drop of key oil. When you apply that, make sure that it's not too much. If key oil gets down into your pads, it can really do a negative job on your instrument. So 1 drop at a time, please. Again, our mouthpiece brush is going to swab in and out of your mouthpiece just to get that extra stuff out. If you have any buildup that occurs in that mouthpiece, it's going to get pretty gross in there, and it's eventually going to affect the tone of your instrument. We don't want that. The last thing that I want to talk about is the polishing cloth. You have a large shiny instrument and you'd like for it to remain shiny, so the morning of a performance, I will always take my polishing cloth and clean big spots like the bell and large spots on the body that have accumulated maybe fingerprints or tarnish over time. Once you've done that, it'll be looking good as new. Now that you know how to maintain and disinfect your instrument, I think it's about time that we start making our first beautiful tones on a mouthpiece.